Rain had a way of settling over Seattle that felt less like weather and more like a mood the whole city agreed to share. And on the night everything changed, it fell in that same slow, endless drizzle against the tall windows of the Blackridge estate. For 3 years, no doctor, no therapist, no bodyguard, and no expert flown in from another continent had managed to make the billionaire's daughter speak a single word. She had sealed herself behind the door of the top floor, refusing every visitor, every appointment, every attempt at connection. Then, on that quiet, rain-soaked evening, a security camera captured something no one expected. A night janitor set an old, battered music player in front of her door and walked away without a word. Minutes later, the door that had never once opened in 3 years shifted, just slightly, on its hinges. The miracle, if it could be called that, had not come from wealth or expertise. It had come from a man the entire building had never truly noticed. Blackridge Global was, by every measure that mattered to the outside world, a company on the edge of history. Executives whispered about a deal worth tens of billions of dollars, a merger that would reshape an entire industry, and reporters camped outside the glass tower, hoping for a glimpse of Vivian Blackridge stepping out of her car. Vivian always appeared exactly as the cameras expected her to. Poised, immaculate, untouchable, a woman who had built an empire from nothing, and now commanded boardrooms with a single raised eyebrow. Analysts described her as a force that could not be negotiated with, a founder who had clawed her way out of a modest upbringing in the Pacific Northwest and turned a small logistics firm into a global conglomerate through sheer will. And it was easy, watching her stride across a stage under bright lights, to forget that she had ever been anything other than untouchable. But each night, when the cameras stopped flashing and the car doors closed behind her, she drove home to a mansion that felt more like a mausoleum than a residence, because somewhere behind one locked door on the top floor, her only daughter was disappearing. The house itself seemed to absorb the silence rather than resist it. Wide hallways lined with art that no one paused to admire, a kitchen large enough to feed dozens that now served only 2, and a staff that had learned, over years of trial and painful error, to move through the residence like ghosts, careful never to make noise near the staircase that led toward Serena's floor. Vivian would stand some nights at the base of that staircase, her hand resting on the railing, unable to make herself climb the final flights toward a door she knew would remain locked no matter how long she waited outside it. Serena Blackridge was not a girl anymore, not in age, though everyone around her still treated her fragility as though it belonged to someone much younger. She was 19, old enough to have started college, though she had never once set foot on campus despite being enrolled. She refused visitors. She refused parties. She refused every specialist her mother's fortune could summon. For more than 3 years, she had not cooperated with a single professional brought into that house, not because she lacked intelligence or warmth, but because something in her had decided, quietly and completely, that the world could no longer be trusted with her voice. Before the silence, staff who had worked in the household longest sometimes whispered that Serena had once been the loudest presence in any room she entered, a bright, curious young woman who filled hallways with music and asked questions faster than anyone could answer them. Something had happened years earlier, an event the household staff referred to only in fragments and never in full, a betrayal of trust so complete that it seemed to have rewritten the very architecture of who Serena believed herself to be. Whatever had occurred, it left her convinced that vulnerability, once offered to the world, would always be used against her. And so she had simply stopped offering it at all, retreating behind a door that no locksmith, no matter how skilled, could open from the outside. While the daughter of the empire vanished behind a locked door, a very different figure moved through the same building each night, one who belonged to no headline and appeared in no boardroom. Silas Rowan arrived after everyone else had gone home, pushing a cleaning cart down empty hallways, his footsteps the only sound in corridors that during the day buzzed with ambition and noise. He rarely spoke more than necessary. He watched people carefully, the way someone trained to notice small things watches a room, though nobody around him understood why a janitor would carry himself with such quiet attention. He fixed things too, broken chairs, flickering lamps, jammed drawers, always without being asked, and always without expecting thanks. To the staff who passed him in the halls, He was simply the older man who cleaned at night, a fixture as forgettable as the furniture. Nobody knew who he had been before that cart, before that uniform, before the silence that seemed to follow him like a second shadow. It was on an ordinary night, while wiping down a bank of monitors near the security office, that Silas happened to glance at an internal camera feed showing the upper floor of the mansion, a feed few employees ever paid attention to. For one brief moment he saw her. Serena stood near her window, not weeping, not raging, simply still, watching the rain the way someone watches a language they no longer remember how to speak. It was only a glance, gone in seconds, but something in Silas recognized what dozens of professionals had missed. She did not hate the world. She was waiting for it to stop, demanding that she prove something before it would listen. Vivian Blackridge had spared no expense in her search for a cure to her daughter's silence. She had hired physicians with international reputations, professors of psychology who had written the textbooks other therapists studied from, specialists flown in from cities across the world, each one arriving with credentials thick enough to fill a wall. Every single one of them failed, and the pattern of their failure was almost identical. Each expert walked into that house believing the goal was to make Serena talk, to extract words from her the way one extracts a confession, to treat her silence as a wall that simply needed the right tool to break through. Silas approached the situation from an entirely different angle, though he never called it an approach at all. While cleaning the hallway outside her room one evening, he paused for a moment in front of her closed door, not to knock, not to ask anything, not to offer advice the way every visitor before him had. He simply set down a cup of hot tea on the small table beside her door and continued his work as though nothing significant had happened. He left no note. He signed nothing. There was no clever message meant to prove his good intentions. The following morning, the cup sat empty. No one in the household could say for certain who had touched it, though the staff assumed it had simply gone cold and been thrown away by someone tidying the hall. Nobody thought to check the cameras, not at first, because nobody imagined a lonely janitor's small gesture could possibly matter to a story that had already consumed so many experts and so much money. When someone finally reviewed the footage days later, at Vivian's quiet insistence after noticing the tea had become a nightly occurrence, what they found made the household go still. The door had opened, barely, just enough for a hand to reach through and take the cup, and the hand belonged unmistakably to Serena. Vivian watched the clip over and over that evening, alone in her study long after the staff had gone home, replaying those few seconds until the image blurred from the tears she refused to let fall in front of anyone else. She had spent a fortune on locked rooms full of framed degrees and confident promises, and none of it had produced anything close to the sight of her daughter's fingers curling around a simple ceramic cup, left by a stranger who wanted nothing in return. Encouraged by what he did not yet know anyone had witnessed, Silas continued his small ritual each night, though he thought of it as nothing more than kindness, not strategy. He left an old paperback book one evening, its spine worn soft from years of handling, a novel about a lighthouse keeper who spoke to no one for months at a time and somehow remained whole. Another night, it was a vinyl record, the kind that crackled with warmth no digital recording could replicate, chosen because he remembered, from some half-forgotten detail in an old household file, that Serena's father had once played similar records on quiet Sunday mornings before he passed away. Later came a small landscape painting he had found forgotten in a storage closet, a modest watercolor of mountains under fog that reminded him of nothing in particular except stillness. And after that, a single leaf pressed flat between two pieces of paper, its edges gone the color of rust, a small proof that something could change shape entirely and still remain beautiful. He attached no notes. He made no requests. He simply offered these things the way one offers company to someone sitting alone, without demanding they speak first, without turning generosity into a transaction that expected repayment in the form of conversation. Some nights, he wondered whether any of it mattered at all, whether he was simply an old man leaving trinkets outside a door that would never open, indulging a hope he had no right to hold on to. He kept doing it anyway, because somewhere in his years of sitting across from broken soldiers, he had learned that presence rarely announced its own value, that sometimes a person needed to feel safety, accumulate quietly, object by object, evening by evening, long before they trusted themselves to reach for anything larger. A week into this quiet pattern, Silas noticed something while dusting the hallway table outside her door. Each object he had left behind had been carefully rearranged, straightened, placed with a kind of deliberate care that suggested hands had lingered over them longer than a moment. It meant she was touching them. It meant, in whatever fragile language remained available to her, Serena was responding. Vivian, watching the same footage her security team had begun quietly compiling, felt something crack open in her chest that she had not expected. For the first time in 3 years, her daughter was reacting to another human being, reaching toward connection instead of retreating from it. But the person on the other side of that door was not a doctor or a therapist with a diploma to justify the miracle. He was a janitor, a man whose file in the company system contained barely more than a name and a start date. That contradiction unsettled Vivian more than it comforted her, and within days she ordered a full investigation into Silas Rowan, determined to understand exactly who this stranger was and why her daughter, who had rejected the finest specialists money could summon, had chosen to trust him instead. She told herself the investigation was a matter of security, a reasonable precaution for any parent whose vulnerable child had begun forming an attachment to someone with unknown motives, and there was truth in that reasoning. But beneath it sat something rawer and less comfortable to admit, a flicker of something close to jealousy, the uncomfortable realization that a stranger pushing a cleaning cart had accomplished in a matter of days what she, with all her resources and all her love, had failed to accomplish in 3 years. She assigned her most trusted security director to the task personally, insisting on discretion, unwilling to risk word spreading through the company that the founder was quietly investigating a member of her own janitorial staff. The director returned within the week looking unusually unsettled for a man who had spent decades handling sensitive matters for the family without visible reaction. What the investigators found,